Welcome to Private Paint Party on YouTube. I've got a new fun painting to share with you guys today. I am hoping that you guys can sit back, relax, paint along with me. That's the idea. If you're new to the channel, I'm still sort of new to YouTube and building a channel. So I hope you'll learn and grow with me as I try to put some really awesome, easy step-by-step paint and sip style paintings out for you online. The idea is so that you can watch them at home and paint along with me, or maybe, put them on with a group of friends and have your own private paint party at home. So today we're going to do an awesome orchid. Let me show you. I've got one from a previous paint and sip in the past, and I always love this one. I thought it was really lovely. Orchids, I think, are kind of intimidating at first, but I'm going to show you how to simplify it, how to kind of break it down and make it easy. And there's not really much happening in the background, so you don't have to worry about this being too hard, I promise. And that's the whole reason I'm here and the reason we're painting together anyway. We are painting in acrylic paints today. Painting with these paints, a set from Winsor & Newton that I think has just a really great range of colors. If you want to learn more about those, please see my earlier video about supplies. That way I don't bore you to tears talking on and on about them now. But it's a good paint set, acrylic paints. There's a link that can help you buy them. I highly recommend, and they're affordable too. I start with just usually 3 brushes. Small, medium, and large. That's all you really need. But sometimes I throw in some extra ones that I have laying around here too, especially a couple of extra mediums is nice. We've got a water cup, old mug filled with water, old t-shirt rag, canvas, easel. You don't even have to go out and buy an easel. You can just lean a canvas against a pile of books on your kitchen table or whatever. The palette could be an old paper plate. It's not to be this fancy plastic thing, which is not that fancy. Probably still cost me like $10 or something. Anyway, so that's it. That's all you got to do to set up. And let me start this painting with you. So the first thing you need to decide is what you want your background color to be. I am a huge fan of turquoises and teals, so it's my favorite color, so I just tend to go to that when in doubt. So I'm definitely gonna do that, but there's more of a reason too, because it's sort of an opposite tone to these beautiful pinkish reds in my orchid. So if you want to do the pinkish red orchid, you don't have to. Of course, you could make like an orange or a purple or whatever, but if you're doing these tones along with me, I do recommend this color. I think it's awesome because if you know anything about the color wheel, if you've seen the color wheel, you know that red and green are opposites. But guess what? If you paint a lot of red and green, what does it look like? Christmas. It looks like a Christmas painting, right? So we don't want that. So the sort of just off color from red and green, pink is essentially red plus white, right? And then teal is a green plus a white. And so those two colors, because they're sort of just, they're just variations of their red and green primary color counterparts, and they're opposite on the color wheel. They really pop and contrast and also harmonize. They look beautiful together. So I still recommend the turquoise, but if you want to do like a sky blue or something else, just whatever goes with your decor in your home or your favorite color, feel free, and we can talk some more maybe about what colors can go in the flower that might harmonize with those different options. But yeah, if you're painting along with me, I'm going to do a turquoise in the background. And first thing I'm going to do, I'm just going to fill the whole canvas with it. So I'm grabbing my biggest, fattest brush. I'm going to get this phthalo green that's in the set on my brush. And I'm going to just start like that. I know it looks a little wacky, right? You're like, what? She said turquoise. Why is it looking green? Well, that's just because this is part A of step 1. And you're kind of seeing how much water I have on my brush. I kind of dip my brush in my cup, get it a little wet. I come back. It keeps the paint moving and flowing to have the water on the brush. I don't mind that I had maybe a little too much and I got some drips this time, so this is just the background. But as you go forward from here, you kind of want to maybe dab your brush on your rag a little more to get rid of the excess wetness and drips so it doesn't do stuff like that. But yeah, there we go. Good start. Now check it out without even washing my brush off, because these colors are mixing together anyway, so I don't need my brush to be clean. I got a bunch of white on my brush. And check this out. This is just mixing right on the canvas. I like to do that for certain steps. I think it's not only easier, it's also more relaxing and fun. And you just get to go back and forth on your canvas. And you'll see how that white is mixing into the phthalo green, kind of making it more of a sort of mint color, minty green, almost, but not quite a turquoise. There's still another part of the step. This is part B of part 1, step 1, I should say. And I'm having to dip into my water a fair amount. These acrylic paints, they really just want to dry on you too quick sometimes. And that's great for layering. Sometimes it's a little annoying if you're still trying to blend some stuff like I am here. Getting a little more white on my brush. Blending, mixing in. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that color. Next, without even having to wash my brush off, I'm going to get some cerulean blue on the edge of it. Ooh, look at that. And I'm just going to kind of keep mixing that in, and that will make that lovely turquoise color I was looking for. The phthalo green, the white, and now part C of our step 1, some cerulean blue mixing in to make that lovely turquoise color. So now we just have to let it dry for a couple minutes. Take a break, sip your drink, switch out your water. I recommend new fresh water after this because it's probably pretty blue right now. But yeah, 5-10 minute intermission, and then we'll be back at the painting. Okay, back at it. Hopefully you got a chance to let the paint dry, pause the video, gave it a few minutes, maybe pulled out that hair dryer. That's a great trick, right? Take the hair dryer, go back and forth over the painting a few minutes if you need it. The painting does not have to be perfectly dry, just sort of dry enough at this point. You just don't want that under color to sort of pick up on our next step. Like I said, 5 or 10 minutes, but it really kind of just depends on where you're painting. Are you painting outside, inside, warm weather, cold weather? There's so many variables, humidity. So I couldn't tell you for sure if you just need to, give it 5 minutes or 20, or if the hair dryer is your best bet. Just feel it out. Just make sure that it's dry enough that if you kind of tap it, you don't get a ton of paint there on your fingers. And then, then we're ready to move on to our next step, which is to draw out the orchid. So obviously there's tons of different orchids in the world. They're all a little bit different, but there was a particular one I was looking at, and I don't know the name of it by any means, but that's what I'm gonna sort of draw from, and I think it's a fairly easy one to break down. I always thought orchids were beautiful but really intimidating when I first started to draw and paint them. They were just so complex, and they still are, but I think this one we can break it down and make it somewhat easy. So take your smallest brush, get some white paint on it, and we're going to draw the shape out in white first, which has a dual purpose. First, of course, drawing, but also that it's going to sort of block out the background color for the part that we're painting. That way the orchid is not fighting and having the blue and green come through it, since it's a really bright, beautiful color, and we want to kind of offset it from the background. So anyway, kind of like making the shape first and then the color. So kind of just take a look at your canvas, figure out where you want to put it. When in doubt, you can put it straight in the middle. I always think it's just sort of off center a little bit looks kind of nice, but up to you. If you're not quite sure how big to make it, err on small. I've said it in previous videos, but you can always make smaller things bigger. It's a lot harder to like whittle it down though, make it smaller if you made it too big at first. So all that said, let's get started. And guess what? All we got to do is make a star shape. You know that 5-pointed star that we all learned to draw back in elementary school? Hopefully. I will say one little tip on this is just make sure it's not too skinny. Like sometimes you draw this and these 2 points are kind of really close together at the bottom. We don't want that. If anything, you want them a little wide, and you'll see why later. But I am just drawing a star. I kind of made it smaller. I took my own advice, and now I'm thinking I want it a little bit bigger. Right. And then you can kind of start filling it in with the white paint. Doesn't have to go on perfectly smooth or anything. Just kind of a quick fill in. All right. And now we'll start getting the shapes in, and you'll see why I chose to do the star. So first and foremost, there is sort of a tall, skinny petal up here, and I noticed it's just almost like a pointed oval. So I couldn't tell you exactly what the shape is I'm drawing, but I'm kind of just drawing almost like an egg shape over my top point of my star, but I let it have a little pointy tip at the top there. All right, and that is petal number 1. Now we'll do these 2 here. They're the biggest ones that kind of fluff up. I think they're kind of fun. And honestly, they remind me of elephant ears. That's the shape that's in my head as I paint them. But what that translates to for us, see, I'm going to just kind of, you could honestly kind of just make a circle or another big oval, but it's going to be bigger than this one, okay? You don't want it to overlap or touch. You still want a little bit of space. I mean, if it touched a little, it's not the end of the world, but because they do sometimes overlap. But just for now, while you're getting your shapes in and keeping them kind of distinct from each other will help you just sort of see what you're doing. All right, so I kind of made it a little smaller at first. Now I'm making it bigger again. So far, it's almost just like a giant circle that I've put right there. But then the reason they kind of remind me of elephant ears is just this little bit at the tip. There's just a little bump on the edge there. Kind of like that. And that's our next petal. And we go to this side and we do the same thing. Same shape, just sort of mirror opposite. Notice I'm staying away from this area down here, making sure that that still has its own distinct space. But really kind of filling out the area on the sides here for my orchid. Again, just plain white paint. If you happen to have gesso handy, you can always use that. Gesso's cheaper than white paint, right? So sometimes for these sort of block-in shapes, I'll cheat and use that. But right now I've got the actual white paint on my brush so that I'm using the exact set that you hopefully have in front of you. Okay, circle. Let's give it a little bump like that. And then maybe I'll make it a little bigger over here. There we go. These are the biggest petals on the Orchid. So you're allowed to go big or go home with them. Like I said, elephant ears are almost like fat little lemons on the side. I think that's kind of funny. But yeah, something like that. Don't worry if your shape is not perfect. There's no such thing as perfect in this painting. In fact, things will look a little more natural and organic if they're not perfect. So if the edge is a little wiggly or the shape's not quite right, don't worry. It'll work out in the end. It'll just give it more the effect of, you know, maybe petals sort of blowing in the wind or sort of being twisted and tilted a little bit. All right, so now that I'm looking at these two, and I'm kind of seeing them in comparison to the original one I did, the one thing I see when I look at my original reference, which I'm not showing you, it's in my head, that's why I don't actually have it, but I remember that this part was actually pretty tall. So now that I filled those out, made them bigger, this felt a little too short. So all I did was just build up a little extra space on top of the white. And there you go. We're already quite a ways along in blocking out our shape. So we're, if you haven't figured it out already, you're going to be adding some petals to here and here. But guess what? This is why I wanted these to be a little wide. There is a 6th petal in here that kind of fits in at the bottom. I think of it almost like a little beard on the face of this orchid, and it goes right in between the two. So before I work on them, just so that I keep my space right, I'm going to do it. And you know what it is? I've noticed it's pretty much just a square with rounded edges, because it would look funny if it was a perfectly pointy square, right? But just a little square shape tucked in between the two bottom leg petals. You don't want it to be so big and wide that it takes over and intrudes on their space, but it has its own distinct space, and you want to get that in right there. And now that we've done that, now I can add on here. And these are also very similar to that top petal. They're kind of the same thing, a little longer, a little skinnier. And I just sort of add like an oval shape on top of them and a little bit of a point. If you can't quite figure out how to do a point, do a triangle. See how it's almost like a little bit of a rectangle, oval type shape that comes to a point that could look like a triangle. And same thing over here. I can kind of build this out, make it a little longer, a little thicker, and kind of let it come to a point right there. And ta-da! With all that, you have an orchid shape. Isn't that funny that all those weird random shapes come together like that? But they do. So now we just need to let this white, our sort of white out paint here, dry a bit. If you can't tell what I'm doing, I'm going back and kind of fluffing out here any of the paint that left really big chunky brush strokes that made a lot of texture that might just be hard for me to fight later. I'm just trying to smooth it. I do not care if it's a perfectly opaque white. You can totally see some of the background coming through. I don't mind that at all. We've got so many layers that's going to go on here. It will be absolutely fine. Just, you know, something that helped us get the shape in there without thinking too hard about color yet. And something that we can let dry and then go back on top of. So while it's drying, we have another step we can work on, sort of buying us time, but also just being really strategic, jumping back and forth, you know, do one step, let it dry, work on another area of your painting while that's drying. And then by the time you get that done, you can come back to what you just did. So anyway, small brush, I am rinsing it out in my water. And next I'm going to grab the green, that dark phthalo green. You could probably use any green that you have in your palette or collection of paints, I should say. If you're not using the exact same set that I am, that's fine. You can just get away with a dark green for this. What we're going to do is kind of like the stem, the part that the orchid is connected to in the background. This can kind of go any which way. You just want it to feel connected to this orchid. And I think one of the, great rules in art, again, in art, there's rules, you just learn them to know when to break them, right? There aren't really tons of rules, but for things looking realistic, there are a few, and one of those is the principle of overlap. So if we have this beautiful flower out front and I sort of tuck the stem, the darker green line back behind it, it will make that orchid pop out and it will look like it's connected to the stem because the stem will be behind it. So I think it's just good to do a diagonal wherever you think suits it. And I'm actually going to do a couple if you're wondering. You're like, wait, that doesn't look right. That doesn't connect. Well, that's because I'm kind of thinking that's the big main stem back there. And then my orchid, I think, connects like that. But yeah, it's as simple as that. It does not have to be complicated or complex. Once that dries, we'll go over it with a little bit of other color. All right, now this next part is a step I want to show you that is somewhat optional. If you like how it is in the background, you can just leave it. If you don't want to add anything more, maybe you want your focus to be just 100% on that orchid and you don't want any distractions. But, and again, strategically, because we still need to let this dry a little, I've got another step for you, something that's kind of fun, additional, and you can add it if you want, and it gives us some time to let that dry a little bit more while we're still working on other parts of the canvas. And that is, sometimes I think it's kind of nice to put some palm fronds in the background as if we are somewhere very, very tropical. And all you do for that is another diagonal, whichever way you want. I could have it point up. In this case, I decided to have my palm frond point down. And that's the center line of the palm frond. And then check it out. You just start making some lines come off of that line like so. And I'll do it on this side too. Notice they aren't perfectly perpendicular to the center line. They don't just go straight out. They actually kind of are diagonal, a little maybe curvy too. And again, this is where that imperfection in the brush strokes actually works for you, not against you, because it looks more organic, more true to life, truly like leafy palm fronds in the background. So they look a little sparse right now. I'm going to put a few more lines in. Sometimes having them kind of have some variety too in terms of thickness and size and shape is good. There, what do you think? I'm not quite sure if I want to put another one. Maybe I'll have one go up this way. I don't know, but I'm going to do the next step first before I make that decision. So I'm rinsing my small brush off. Look at this, we're pretty much all using small brush now. I'm getting some yellow on my brush. Look at that. Honestly, either the lemon yellow or the cad yellow will work on this. And while this green is still wet, just going to kind of go over the line a little bit. And then go over some, maybe not all, but some of these lines. And it's an awesome two-step trick almost to immediately give a lot more depth and life to this palm frond, to have the yellow go on top of the dark green, because where they mix together, they make kind of a medium green. Where the yellow stands out, it looks like a highlight. Where the darker green just sort of holds its own and shows through, it's more like a shadow. And the palm fronds are never just one exact tone of green anyway. It gives it a lot of life to have this extra bit of color in there. Yeah, what do you think? If anything bugs you, like for me, I kind of want to bring back my center line a little bit. I rinsed out my small brush and I went back to the green. And I might just down like that to bring that center line back out a bit. That's it. That's really all you got to do. So I'm looking at mine, just trying to figure out what do I want here. And I think I like this area, sort of feeling like sky, like it's just, you know, kind of open space. It harmonizes things to have areas of detail and then areas of open space. So I think I'm going to leave that. But I'm sort of feeling like this feels a little funky, like it's just a little too perfect floating in the air there. So I'm going to put a second palm frond, one that maybe overlaps a little bit over here. And I'm going to make this my center line. This one's kind of bigger, coming out from the side. I'm actually going to pop my canvas off the easel a little bit like that so that I can get all the way to the bottom. All right, there we go. And then sort of same thing, diagonal lines in the green. Phthalo green is best if you have it. Any kind of dark forest green though will work. All right, like so. And now kind of diagonal lines kind of come in the other way. Notice they always kind of point towards the end, the tip of the palm frond. Yeah, I think that looks a little more realistic. Overlapping principle, right? There's shapes, there's overlaps, there's background, middle ground, foreground, all these things that you can learn more about in art. And they all just help things come to life. Okay, so now I've cleaned out my brush, gone back for the white, the yellow. What am I saying? And I'm kind of just quickly going over some lines, although not worrying about perfection, because the imperfection is the beauty of it. Letting that wet yellow meet with the wet green. Creating some cool palm fronds. And maybe another highlight sort of down the center line. Yeah, I like it. I think I'm going to leave that be. I don't want to overwork it, risk messing anything up, so I'm just going to leave it. And we never put a highlight over on this, on the orchid stem, and it probably deserves just a little bit. You don't want to go too heavy-handed with this. You want to keep this really skinny and simple. But since that green has had a chance to dry, I feel a little safer going on it. I didn't care as much with the palm fronds. The messiness kind of adds to the effect with them. But with this orchid, I just need to be a little more careful that it doesn't get too fat. So I am now putting my yellow straight on top of the green. But if you notice, I'm not covering the whole thing. I'm not going down the center. I kind of picked a side. In this case, the left side. Doesn't really matter which. Could be left, right, whatever. But I'm kind of picking one side and sticking to it so that it looks a little bit more like a highlight. Kind of gives a quick cheater's way to make that stem look a little more three-dimensional if it has one side that's a light green and the other dark. And there you go. I'm pretty happy with it. Worst case scenario, you do something you don't like up here, I don't know, that looks a little too thick to me. I might come back later if I feel like working this hard, but I might mix up some of my cerulean, my phthalo, and white on my palette to remix that background color, and I might come back and try to make that a little skinnier again. But that's the worst case scenario, having to remix the background color and come in and kind of re-outline things, kind of get their shapes right. And it's totally doable. It's not the worst thing in the world, but I'm hoping that I walked you through the steps enough that you don't have to do that. And we can move on to painting this lovely orchid now. Okay, so I'm gonna actually pick up my medium brush. It's been a while since I used it. I haven't even used it yet in this painting, have I? Medium brush. I got it a little wet, dipped it in my water just enough, but then also dabbed it on my paper towel so it's not dripping. And now I'm going to pick up this beautiful permanent rose color that we have, kind of pinkish red. If you have a magenta or some other pink color you want to use, go for it. Or if you want a red orchid, or yellow for the matter. It doesn't matter. Just what you want to do now is pick up the color that you want to be the main tone of the whole orchid. But it is going to have some white coming through because a lot of them have a color plus white. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to just sort of fill in the top parts of the petals, but not the bottom. I would say kind of like the top half, like that. And then I'm gonna maybe get a little bit thicker paint on my brush for a little darker, but then I'm gonna leave it and I'm gonna walk away. I'm not gonna get into this area. You wanna avoid the middle. You wanna leave it just kind of like that, where it's just the outer edge of the petal. And the same thing over here for these elephant ear like petals. Notice I let my brush kind of go out a bit into the background, and that doesn't bug me too much. Notice that pink on top of the turquoise actually kind of made a purple, almost like a little shadow. So it doesn't bother me. If it bothers you, you can wipe it up real quick or fix it. That's sort of, I guess, in Bob Ross style, kind of one of those happy accidents, right? I didn't really mean to do it, but it doesn't really bug me either. All right, I'm gonna let that be something like that. I'm gonna move along, do the same thing over here. Again, I'm avoiding this middle area. You'll see why in a little bit. Notice this pink, or at least mine, this sort of permanent rose color, goes on pretty transparent. It's one of those more see-through of the acrylic paints. And it can be annoying sometimes, but once you learn which colors are more transparent and which ones are more opaque, you learn to let it work for you and kind of use it to your advantage. So right now, it's showing through a little bit of the white underneath, and I actually think that's perfect. It gives it kind of the right tone and texture. All right, this one, it has a little detail of the white, but it's going to be easier for us to go over it later. So for now, it just gets filled in entirely with the pink or whatever mid-tone color you decided. Main overall color. Same over here. Go. And this bottom slightly curved square shaped petal, same thing, pretty much entirely filled in with the rose color. Okay, that's actually looking good, I think. Yeah, this is a pretty quick painting. It's not going to take that many more steps for us to finish it. So if you're needing something quicker, this is maybe the one to go for. Also, you can add more orchids and more petals and palm fronds too. So it has a lot of potential to be added to and built out if you're somebody that wants to add more detail. All right, so leaving this, like I said, some white in the middle. You'll see why here in a second. We're now going to start working in and adding the details. I feel like this part is maybe the hardest, most intimidating part in the orchid, but I think we can just make it easy by breaking it down real good. So back to the smallest brush so you can kind of draw, do detail. I'm going to use that same color, whatever color you did here on the petals, for me the permanent rose. You just get that back on your brush. I like to kind of twist it a little, let the paint come down, make a little paint on the tip so it's easier to draw and I don't worry about big chunks getting in my way. But what we're going to do is draw a small line like so, right in what would be the middle of the orchid. And then up here, another small line, but even skinnier. And then kind of almost like a stop sign shape. I'm just kind of doing a diagonal line out and a diagonal line back down. I guess that's more of a hexagon than an octagon, right? But there you go. If all you can do is a square or even a circle, it'll be good enough. It'll be impressionism, and it will give the impression of the orchid. But if you can kind of make this hexagon, you'll be even in better shape. And then down here, about as wide as that shape is, you leave another space similar to it. Come down, make another line. And now I'm just going to make this kind of like U shape and connect up to that funny little hexagon I just made. And that's a part of the middle. I don't know the correct scientific terms for it by any means. But yeah, the middle part of the orchid, if you can do either a circle, a square, or even better, a little hexagon here, and in another sort of square or oval or U shape here, you've got a great start for your orchid. So now I'm going to clean my small brush out. And here's where I've noticed there's a little color that pops up. I'm getting some yellow on my smallest brush. I did have to kind of dip my brush to the side and make sure I didn't get any that had any green on it, because some green worked its way into my yellow from these previous steps. So maybe, you know, wipe it on the palette first to double check. But I noticed that there's a little pop of color here inside this thing, whatever it is, this shape, hexagon shape. I'm just going to add a little yellow like that. I let a little bit of the white show through because I kind of just want a little extra color in there, but there's no real specific shape. Just add a bit of yellow for an impression there. Okay, so now all the main elements are there. It's just a matter of layering on paint, pushing and pulling, adding detail, and especially with that sort of transparent color that we happen to choose here, it takes a few layers to really make it look good and also kind of give it some beautiful texture like a real orchid petal. If you used a different color that's a little more opaque, you'll have to use your judgment with how many layers you're going to want to use. It's just really until it looks good, right? One of the first details that I want to now go back in is some of the lines I see in these orchids that happen in these petals down here. And they're in white. And I just didn't want to have to kind of, you know, carve out my paint around them earlier. It was easier to just paint over with my color. But now I can come back in with some detail. I cleaned my smallest round brush here really good, getting some pure white on it. I'm going to kind of roll it so it just gets some there on the point, and then check it out. What I see happen is just sort of towards the edge, towards the tip of the orchid, I kind of see this like outlining happening, a little bit of white there. And then I see a center line come down all the way like that. Now notice I didn't make this completely perfect, not completely straight. Same thing for this. Again, it doesn't have to be. It'd be really hard to get it perfectly straight. And if you have completely straight lines in nature, it does not look right. So it's better to just sort of embrace the messiness and kind of let it be a little wiggly wobbly. See, like that. And it will look more natural that way. The center line down that, a little bit of white outlining on the sides. And there, something like that. Might come back and add a little bit more to that one. Okay. And another area I saw some interesting sort of texture, white lines creating other lines within the petal was here. Just a few kind of diagonal type of lines like that. And then the big areas I saw, coming from here, going into these big petals, I saw a lot of kind of fading white into the pink in these kind of line shapes. And if it is a little too much, I'll come back with some pink in a moment and kind of go back into it. But for now, I'm starting my brush at the white in the center, dragging, pulling, creating lines, going into this petal there, like so. And up here, I saw kind of the same thing. I don't need much. 1, 2, 3. That's good enough for me. I'll let that kind of come in. All right, now clean off this small brush, get rid of the white, and go back to your pink or whichever color you used. And for me, I feel like I need more layers, and I need to let some of this pink overlap into some of that white I just did. Oh, my brush got a little bit of it, of the white and the pink on it. Doesn't bother me. Kind of made for a little bit longer line there. Just come back with some more. And there you go. Something like that. Back and forth, back and forth. Notice that as I'm putting more of my permanent rose color here, it's making a deeper, darker pink, at least around the edges. And then where it meets the white, sometimes there's a little bit more of a lighter pink because it kind of mixes a bit. I want another layer of my pink tone down here just to make that a little richer. And maybe a little bit more here. I'm going to come back with a little bit more, and in some places use it to sort of define the petals, like here and here. You can kind of really see where one stops, the other one starts. Now back to my white, clean my brush real good because I felt like that was a little too thick in some spots. And there we go. If it is looking good to you, be done with it. You are good to go if you're liking it. If you're like me and I just feel like it needs a little something, and sometimes that something is just a touch of a different color that's similar, kind of on the same spectrum as the main color, but just a little different. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little red and let it mix in with that pink just to give it a little more visual interest. So my cad red from earlier had dried out. I'm getting some more right here. And this is pretty strong and less transparent than the permanent rose, so it'll cover real good, but it's also maybe too strong, so I don't want a lot of it. In fact, I'm going to kind of wipe some of it off of my brush, but just maybe in the areas that are already mostly pink, I'm going to come in with that little bit of the red on my brush. Just add a few little lines of it. Lines of cad red. If you went for a lighter tone overall, more of a light pink or purple or whatever, you can come back with another color that you like and just add a little bit of white to lighten it. But notice how much this red is working with what's already there. It's just barely different, just a tiny little shift, a tiny little shift on the color wheel over a little bit in hue, which means just the pure color. So you don't want to pick some color that's really contrasting or really different than the main color you did for the orchid overall. You want to pick something sort of right next to it on the color wheel, similar. If you don't know what I'm talking about, Google color wheel, you'll see it can help you pick colors. And there we go. And that is just about it, everybody. If it looks beautiful, like I said, quit while you're ahead, be done. I hope you're happy with it. I hope you found this relaxing and enjoyable to do. If you're like me and I'm staring at it and I'm like, oh, I still just want a little bit more detail, a little something, I'm going to show you one more trick to do. And that is I'm taking that pink color, the permanent rose that I was using. I'm going to find a new area to mix it. And this time on my palette, instead of on the canvas, I know I do a lot of mixing on the canvas. So on my palette, I'm mixing a little white with that permanent rose to make a lighter pink, you know, more like that true Pepto-Bismol kind of pink. And I think I just want to put a little bit of that in these sort of transition areas, in the places where the pink and the red I did originally were meeting the white. And it's sort of a cheater's way to blend, right? By mixing up a lighter version of the color that has a bit of white in it and letting it kind of meet in the middle between the two colors. I want to keep these lines, this sort of white outline, really distinct, as well as these diagonals, because I noticed in the photo I was looking at, they were very distinct on the orchid. But it's more just up here in these top three petals. Really big, they command a lot of attention. I just felt like a little detail was owed to them. And sometimes I think it's too much, so I come back here with some more of my original main color, that permanent rose, the pink. Kind of add it in there. All right, I think we're done, everybody. Ooh, just one little area right here. Thank you so much for painting with me today. Again, my name is Carrie. This is Private Paint Party on YouTube. The intention is for you to be able to just put this on the background, maybe even put me on mute, who knows, and just follow along the steps at a nice, gentle, relaxed pace for some easy beginner acrylic painting. So I hope that worked out for you well today and that you enjoyed it and you're really happy with your finished product. I think this orchid is just lovely. So have a good one. Take care. Thank you very much for your time.